Hey, Assalamualaikum everyone, this is Emin Masood. Welcome to my YouTube channel, That Blind Girl. Today's video will be in the That Blind Girl Talks About the Law playlist. Sorry about my voice, I have recently recovered from a cold and its remnants are still there. Anyway, today I will start with a story, a very short little story that I've heard go around. I'm not going to name any names because I don't know them. Um, and so the story is kind of, well, it involves several areas of the law. But the one I'm going to focus on, and it's very surprising to me, by the way, but anyway, I'm going to focus on a particular aspect of it, and apparently the story is that a mother-in-law has two concerns. One, that her daughter-in-law might take over her house, and two, that her daughter-in-law is stealing from her. And a lot of people have these problems in the family. The area of law that this involves is property law. People's things, people's houses. Property. So, people's things are considered personal property. People's houses, apartments, condominiums, townhomes, etc. People live, or even storefronts and stuff that people own, land of any kind, is called real property. The laws, basically, that I'm going to give a very general overview of U.S. law. Property law really is very different from state to state. And so you can understand that it would be very different from one country to another. It does have a lot of similarities, especially as well, especially because a lot of U.S. property law comes from Old English property law. But generally, property law is very different from state to state, although there are some general things that I will talk about. One thing to remember also is that property law really overlaps with other areas of the law. It involves a lot of other areas of the law. And so I remember when I was in law school, my classmates and I were always so frustrated when our property law professor brought up some other area of the law, like criminal law, like constitutional law, like tort law, like contracts. And my professor had a really, well-entrenched habit of doing this every class, and it was so annoying. But property law really has a lot. It involves a lot of these different areas of the law. Related to the story that I started with, that involves tort law and possibly even criminal law. In that, if, for example, if, for example, the mother-in-law is right, and the daughter-in-law has stolen something from her, then that's obviously trespass to chattels, which is, as we discussed in the as I discussed with you in the tort video, is a tort, is a civil wrong. It can also be conversion if, which is another tort, if the daughter-in-law has, held the stolen property for a long time, or has used it, sold it, or given it away as a gift. If the daughter-in-law is trying to take over the house, before I go to the house part, the criminal aspect of it is if the property is worth a certain value, then it could be grand larceny, which is a crime, or larceny too, if it's less than $1,000. Sorry, excuse me. And so that's how you can see that property law involves torts and criminal law right there. Excuse me. If I go on, if the mother-in-law is right and the daughter-in-law is trying to take over the house, there might be a claim for trespass to land, which is a tort claim. If she causes, problems like this, causing a ruckus and stuff, it might lead to a criminal charge of disturbing the peace. Also, if she remains after being asked to leave and the police gets involved, there could be a criminal trespass charge as well. That's if the daughter-in-law is indeed trying to do that. Now going away from the story for just a bit, I know that the story is probably very intriguing, but going away from the story, because honestly I don't like it, it's really sad that these things happen in families. I mean, among strangers, it's it's still sad, but when family members do it to each other, or even suspect each other of doing this, it's even worse. But anyway, going away from the story, the other thing we want to consider when we think about property law is tax law. That's very involved in property law, especially property taxes on land and such, and even gift taxes on personal property. The other thing we want to remember is property law involves ownership rights and use rights. So, for example, so a lot of times these are the person who has the ownership rights also has use rights. But a lot of times, especially in cases where there's a lease agreement, a rental agreement, the landlady or landlord has the ownership rights to the property, and this is more common in real property, right? Has ownership rights, but the tenant has the use rights to that property. So during the lease, the landlady or landlord cannot enter the property without the tenant's permission, generally. Um, Property law involves contract law in many, many ways. Most commonly because a lot of contracts involve, especially for the sale of property, for example, of real property, the sale of land, contract law requires that such contracts be in writing, and they have to comply with the statute of frauds. Excuse me. The other thing is that contracts can involve the property being of a certain condition, and if the property isn't of that condition, then, so for example, there's, if the property, if the contract involves that the property will be clean when it's sold, and it's not clean, it's a completely trashed out house, then that could be a breach of the contract. The final area that I'm going to discuss, well, not the final, second last, is this, especially when we're talking about real property like land, is this concept of adverse possession. Basically, if a person acts as though they own a particular piece of land and excludes others from it, and it's very obvious that the person is doing it, and the person keeps doing it for a certain amount of years that's in the state statute, and the year is the amount of years is usually between 10 and 20 years, so a very long time. So if a person keeps doing that, then the person can claim a right to the property. Coming back to my story, the mother-in-law, who's afraid that her house might be taken over, one thing is that the property in question, she's not being excluded from it, right? The person wanting to take over has to exclude others from the property, and so if she's not excluded from it, it's likely that that the daughter-in-law cannot take it through adverse possession. Also, from what I understand it, she has not been excluded from the house, and so there have been things like she should leave, etc., but she's not been excluded from the house. Her name is in the deed, and so excuse me, so the daughter-in-law cannot take over the house. It's very, very unlikely that she can claim it with adverse possession. So the mother-in-law should really be comforted with that. As far as the daughter-in-law is concerned, if this is true, it's a pretty bad idea to try and steal the mother-in-law's property or try to take over her house. It's not very easy to claim adverse possession and over the house, and also if it's discovered that personal property has been stolen like that, and if the value exceeds $1,000, then it could be grand larceny. So, really not advisable for the daughter-in-law to engage in such activity if she is doing that. The final note, and I promise I am done with this horrible story. The final note is that property law involves constitutional law, in that the government cannot take your property without due process. They can't take your personal property without due process. They can't take your real property without compensation, reasonable compensation. So what that means, and this is very common in eminent domain cases where the government needs to build a road or something else, and they need to buy private property, the government has to provide fair compensation to the property owner. A note on personal property: the government can't take it without due process. Also, the government has to go through Fourth Amendment search and seizure, warrant requirements to take it also. Although one important note is that if the government is investigating you for terrorism, it does have more of an ability to take your personal property than if it's investigating you for some other crime. And so that's just something to remember, because terrorism is considered more of a national security issue, where the government, the executive, I should say, has more leeway to act. So this concludes today's video. The issues were a bit complicated. I hope I explained it. I hope the story wasn't a distractor. I hope this video was informative. If you liked today's video, feel free to like and share it, and subscribe to this channel for more videos. Definitely appreciate your comments in the comment box. Thank you.